Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm wearing my Christmas jumper. Let me stand up so that you see it. Yeah, that's it. Silent night, silent night. Actually, I'm fighting with the dark and I'm trying to see, how long I can actually deal with the daylight. At least, take advantage of the daylight because, when you're recording, it's easier with daylight. But anyway, so now, today I wanted to discuss something that's very interesting. The issue is, today I was actually reading the headlines of the newspapers. I decided to subscribe, like for example, to the Nation newspaper in Kenya, which were talking about things that are relevant to people all over the world, which is the divide in terms of, the financial divide and how it's impacting people during Christmas. So in some instances, you see pictures of people strolling on the beaches in their beachwear and their swimwear, having a great time in the coast. And then on the other side, you see a picture of children sitting on the ground, sharing one plate, 4 or 5 of little kids without hardly any proper clothes, sharing one plate. And I think morally that we have an obligation to make sure that people have at least the basics, the very basics, which is, first of all, according to what we call the Maslow hierarchy of needs, is food. Food. People must have food. Yeah, so agricultural commodities, food. Yeah, what we grow, our food, our wheat, our rice, our maize. That's very important that people be able to afford it, especially at Christmas time and during the holiday season like now, where we have people who are struggling to eat, literally struggling to eat, guys. It's actually very, very sad. So, I've been going through a lot of documentation. As you know, I do a lot of research and things like that. I enjoy doing research and finding out the reasons. I want to always ask why. I'm sure you too, when you were born, most children are very, inquisitive and they want to ask why. As we get older, we stop asking why, but we should not. We should always ask why, and investigate and interrogate and find out why. Why are we in this situation? So I was trying to figure out what happened to the Kenyan budget between the time of COVID, between 2020 and 2022. 2022 last year was the election year, and it was a very busy, crazy, you know how election years are, guys, yeah? There's a lot of money that is spent out there. There's a lot of winding up of the old government, of the old regime, and, coming in of the new. There's a lot of spending. There's some people who are holding back on spending because they are not sure, because, the election year period also brings a lot of uncertainties. So we had gone through the uncertainties of COVID, and the fact that many people were locked down, were not able to go to the farms to farm. And in our country, for example, Kenya, compared to Tanzania, Tanzania did not lock down. Neither did Sweden lock down, by the way. So Tanzania did not lock down. Sweden did not lock down. Sweden had very few people who were actually incapacitated by COVID. They had a high, they had a high mortality of the elderly who were in nursing homes, okay? Those are the people who mostly, were affected by COVID and had a high mortality. But when it comes to efficacy of vaccinations, Sweden had the best because actually they did not lock down. So the infection rates and, the recovery rates were very high for a country such as Sweden and also for countries such as in Africa, Tanzania, for example. So, what happened is that in Tanzania, they continued to grow their food. And in Kenya, many farmers had to stay home. They had to lock down. There was no transportation. There was a little bit of transportation, but a little less. Actually, should I say significantly less people actually go to the field. Yeah. I was doing my research and I found out a few very interesting things. First of all, do you remember that there was a time that the government had to allow importation of food duty-free? And therefore had to forego those taxes, value-added taxes, VAT, that would be associated with the imports of those foods. Importation levies, importation taxes that would have been associated to commodities such as vegetables, wheat, maize, rice, sorghum, edible oils, and animal feeds, okay? And it was quite interesting because, I found out that Kenya actually lost a lot of CIF, value of imports. They lost a lot of money. In 2021, for example, they lost a total of about 22 billion shillings. The CIF value of the imports. And the CIF value of imports in 2022 was 68 billion. That's approximately 3 times, isn't it? It's more than 3 times the amount, yeah? The value of imports in 2021 as opposed to the value of imports in 2022. So 2022 saw a much higher importation burden on our budget of food which was about 3 times that of the previous year. Okay, the variance is literally about 46 billion from 2021 to 2022. That is how much tax was lost. That's how much tax expenditure the government incurred. They incurred 10 billion from the wheat imports in 2021, and then eventually incurred 60 billion, okay, of the value of the imports in 2022. What that means is that, you know, the government actually lost that amount of taxable revenue from the importation of this product, wheat. For maize, it was in 2021 it was 1 million, and in 2022 it was 3 million. So actually it looks like we were probably self-sufficient in maize production. Okay. So therefore we didn't really need to import too much, so the government didn't have to, you know, also forego too much revenue in maize. But the rice, on the other hand, rice was imported more in 2021, so the government lost more from rice, 11 billion, as opposed to 2022, where they lost 6 billion, 6.5 billion. All right. Edible oils, very interesting, was actually more than double. So looking at the tax expenditure report, final document, okay, sorghum, if you look, for example, at the chart, let's look at the chart. It's probably easier to understand the chart. Kenya tax-free imports of agricultural commodities. You'll see, for example, if you look at vegetables, almost no difference, right, between 2021 and 2022. 2021 is in blue and 2022 is in orange, okay? So 2021, vegetable oils was, you know, pretty much the same. Wheat, huge difference between 2021 and 2022. The value of imports that was the government had to forego in terms of taxes was almost all of it, okay? In maize, more than double. Sorghum, like about all of it, apart from 39 shillings. Edible oils, very, very high as well. You know, more than 70% of edible oils. Animal feeds, almost 100%. Okay, so basically the government has lost so much money from the importation of food, because now Kenya has become a net importer of basic foodstuffs. And once we import foods, you guys, you know what happens in terms of the prices in the shelves? All that means is that you know, the prices of food goes up from one year to the next. So the price of food went up from 2021 to 2022 exponentially. Yeah, just because the government was not able to recover VAT on imports. Okay, so it actually says here, tax expenditure on imports as a percent of GDP has been on an upward trajectory. From 2019 to 2022, it's been on an upward trajectory, okay? So in 2022, the total tax expenditure related to taxes on imports, which is excise duty, import VAT on oils, and VAT on imports, was 75.7 billion, which is 0.57% of GDP, compared to 20.6 billion in 2019. So you see, the difference in 2022, it's 75.7 billion, all right? That, you know, is a tax expenditure, compared to 20.6 billion. We're not talking about income, we're talking about expenditure. What the government has to forego, what the government is not able to collect. Is not able to collect 20 billion, okay, in 2019, but it's not able to collect 75 billion in 2022. Okay. Similarly, in 2021, amount of tax expenditure was at 41 billion. So it keeps rising and rising and rising from about 20 to 41 to 75 billion. Okay. So this represents an increase of 0.35% of the GDP. Okay. So what that means is that they say that the reason for this, the shift in these rates, was brought about by the new East Africa Community, CET, which I think is the taxes, you know, the tax regime for the East Africa Community, because now we're working as a block, as a regional block. Increased importation of duty-free maize, sorghum, rice, vegetables, raw materials for the manufacture of animal feeds and other foodstuff products. It contributed all to this spike. Now, why am I talking about this issue of, importation and giving duty-free access to food into the country, and the fact, the government trying to balance between ensuring that people have food to eat, ensuring that we actually get those commodities, and ensuring that they actually have enough tax revenue in order to pay for the things that we need in the country. The reason I'm talking about this is because I'm trying to explain the reason why the gap is widening between the haves and the have-nots. The have-nots are having to pay extra money because when the food comes onto the food shelf, all of those costs are actually passed on to the consumer. Because the government is not able to get tax revenue because it bought it in duty-free, so it's going to collect that duty from you and I. Yeah, it's going to charge the people, the millers and everybody else. They're going to pass the costs on to the final consumer. Okay, you know that the IMF and the World Bank have very serious austerity measures. That is measures to try to reduce spending in the global south, which is increasing the cost of products and services, which is inflation. Usually these inflation rates are set by the central banks. Even here in the UK, it's the Bank of England that controls inflation. So my understanding is that inflation, which is the cost of goods and services, is usually raised so that it discourages people from buying, and then it discourages inflation from getting bigger. The interest rates, it triggers a recession, to tame inflation. So what it does, it actually reduces our living standards because we can no longer have access to the wide variety of things that we were able to afford before. So we reduce our living standards. Maybe we reduce the amount of money that we use on our rents, on our food, on where we choose to take our children to school and things like that. The idea is that we spend less, and that way we tame the prices of commodities and products. So if you're spending less, it means that those goods cannot become more expensive. The cost of products and services is influenced by market demands, market dynamics, the law of supply and demand. The war in Ukraine impacted on our abilities to get vegetable oils and wheat and things like that. And a lot of those food commodities were diverted to Europe and other countries. And therefore, Africa was not able to receive a lot of these commodities from those countries. And therefore, there was a lot of aid that was provided to Africa from those countries. And at the same time, the government allowed people, anybody who had money, to just go ahead and import oils and food and grain duty-free, literally, to encourage people to just, spend their money and import the stuff. But they have to find a way to get their money back, one way or the other, And that, of course, impacts on our local farmers, who are also not able to sell the crop that they have in the country. And you remember that in Kenya, there was a big outcry by the farmers because the government had actually imported a lot of wheat and also maize crop now, okay, in the current year. Okay, so let me not go into great detail on this because I don't consider myself to be an expert really. I would love to talk to somebody who's an expert on this, on the cost of living crisis and how it's actually hammering the global south, okay? There's an article by a lady called Grace Blackley and talking about the global south resilience to economic shocks and stripping away, okay, because of debt and austerity measures, countries have to accept to get loans in the first place. And the debts, in her view, must be forgiven. I also want to echo the same views as Grace Blackley that because of COVID, because of the lockdowns, because of the unexpected, decline in productivity in the global south and stresses on economic shocks on Africa that was already highly indebted during the COVID period in 2020s, I feel that it's only fair for those governments to consider a way to either reduce the debt to African countries or to just cross it off altogether, especially for those years, 2020, 2021. The reason being that if the global south cannot manage its debts, if it has to spend all its money, all its income into paying of debt, it means it doesn't have enough money to actually implement projects such as health projects that need to be implemented, child health, maternal health, the public hospitals and things like that. Because I was having a discussion this morning with my sister, who is very interested in finance and things like that. Oh my God, she's brilliant. Anyone who knows my sister, well, we know her, we know that one. I was having a discussion with her. By the way, she graduated top of her university. That's how smart she is, yeah? Highest GPA in Kenya, in the whole uni. Brilliant girl. But anyway, this is not to brag about her, but really she's all brains. She's all brains. So what she's telling me right now is there's so many problems that we're having in the country. So because we are so highly indebted as a nation, it means that the hospitals are owed a lot of money by, for example, the National Health Insurance Fund. The National Health Insurance Fund is similar to what we have here, okay, where we have, you know, the NHS, and we have there's a contribution that we usually have. So the NHS contribution here is called the national insurance. People contribute through their paychecks. It came out in the news recently that the Kenya government has actually not been remitting the taxes. Okay, they've not actually been remitting the taxes that are paid by civil servants to the Kenya Revenue Authority in order to pay what is equivalent to the national insurance there, which is the National Hospital Insurance Fund. What that does is that that name, by the way, the National Health Insurance Fund name, was actually changed recently in Kenya, and it was split into various units or different departments. So the question is, what happens to that legal entity once it loses its original name? But coming to that, in the UK, you know, workers contribute to what they call the national insurance. Okay, the NIF is the fund that is used to service the national health services, which means that we have insurance, global insurance. Everybody gets access to the insurance, and that means that you can visit a hospital, get your medications. In some places like Wales, they don't even charge you for medications. In England, they charge you, I think, a minimum fee of about £9 for all medications. But it just means that it assures you that you can go and visit a doctor if you have a medical condition. For example, there is also something called the National Health Insurance Fund, NHIF. The National Health Insurance Fund is supposed to be accelerated or elevated into something that is similar to the NI, National Insurance Fund of the UK. But the problem with the National Health Insurance Fund in Kenya is that it hasn't been remitting payments to hospitals. So when people go in to the hospital, usually the National Health Insurance Fund will cover the cost of the bed, maybe 4,000 shillings a day. If you have cancer in some private hospitals, you can get treated up to a certain amount. If you are on a high deductible on the NHIF, then you can even get treatment for things like cancer. Especially people like in the civil service, I know that they have access to a lot. The workers and the employers actually are mandated to contribute to the NHIF. Unfortunately, the NHIF has not been remitting payments to hospitals, and the hospitals are owed about 15 billion shillings. But you see how it would have come from last year's tax expenditures. If the government had charged the taxes on, or received the remittances in value-added tax from the importation of food, they would have been able to pay these hospital bills. And you see that the government actually lost 75 billion in 2022, right? Overall, total, apart from just those agricultural commodities, it's 75 billion. Even private hospitals, NHIF, is not able to pay. So, unfortunately, the private hospitals and the public hospitals are saying, we're not taking NHIF anymore. We're not taking your cards anymore. You can go in there with your card, they're not accepting it. You have to pay cash or you have to take a different insurance, but not the government insurance, even if the NHIF name has changed. Because the question is, what happens then to the payments that are owed to the hospital by the NHIF, even if they did change the name of that organization? This issue of changing names is interesting because the question is, the old legal entity will cease to exist, isn't it? Or maybe that issue would be taken to court and it would take years. Justice delayed is justice denied. If the court process takes too long, then in that case, what that means is that justice has been denied. Okay? So there are so many problems. So now we also have the problem with the CDF I mentioned earlier in a different video, where I talked about the County Development Fund. The County Development Fund was actually ruled by the High Court and Supreme Court to be illegal. The government still insists on, this pot of money, which is mainly used by the politicians, give them leverage, in the counties. So this NGCDIF, which they changed, from the CDF, the name has changed to NGCDF. NHIF, name is also changing. So what happens to the legal entity that is there, that is recognized by the Constitution? What happens to that legal entity? What happens to what is owed by that? So the NGCDF, it was approved, I hear, but the question is, was it disbursed? Was that money disbursed, guys? that money probably was not disbursed, yeah, and probably the government is waiting to disburse that money, or maybe will not, because it doesn't actually have any legal mandate to disburse the CDF money. All right. So now we have the problem. The hospitals are saying clear your debts first. We have the CDF issue. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to wind up this video at this point and tell you thank you so much for being on my channel. I really appreciate it. Let's continue talking about this. This is going to be part 1. I'm going to record a part 2 and continue this discussion because we're not really done with it. It's basically just talking about where has all the money gone, and why is it that we are in this situation, and why is it that, you know, the government is now struggling, running helter-skelter, looking for money everywhere, instead of using the opportunities that it has to actually tax things like the food that is coming in, that is being imported into the country. Yeah, so anyway guys, let me talk to you later. Remember to subscribe, like and share my videos, guys.